and welcome to this week's Torah Outreach Program, Erev Shabbos Burst of Inspiration. Today's Burst of Inspiration is sponsored by Dr. Daniel Pomper as a schus for a protection for Adin Dror ben Tvaraleah, together with all the Chayalim, all the soldiers fighting in Eretz Yisrael. And also by Mr. Mark Bodkins as a Mazel Tov for the success of the 47th President, President Donald J. Trump. I learned something very, very interesting this past Shabbos. Yes, it's on the last week's Parsha, last week's Torah reading, but we can apply it to this week's. Now, I learned this, something I never saw in this way, and I learned it from a bar mitzvah boy, no less. The bar mitzvah boy was talking about Noach. Noach was called Ish Tzadik Tamim Haya B'doroso, a righteous man, completely righteous man in his generation. Rashi, the explanation on the Torah, the primary explanation of the Torah, says there's an argument as to what this means by Tamim B'doroso, complete tzaddik, completely righteous man in his generation. What does that mean, in his generation? Some say that if you were in the generation together with a tzaddik, with a righteous man like Abraham, he would be so much better, because he was in a generation of horrible people, and he was still a tzaddik. Others say, no, if he was in the generation of Avram, he wouldn't be so great, because compared to Avram, he wasn't that special. This little bar mitzvah boy, 13 years old, had an outlook on this, and his father told me that he actually cleared it with one of the great rabbis of our neighborhood. That blew my mind. He said, not that if he was compared to Abraham, he would be so great, but if he was in the generation of Abraham, where the tests weren't that high, where the desires of the world were not so bad, where the environment was not so tainted, he wouldn't be so great, because his test wouldn't be so hard. He was able to reach this incredible level, Bidol Rosav, in his generation, because he was able to withstand the temptations of the generation before the flood, when the generation in the time of Abraham, the tests weren't as intense. Now this is an incredible idea, because what it's telling us is the harder the test, if you withstand them, just to withstand the tests, that makes you a great person. You're not judged against other people. He wasn't being judged or compared to Avram. He was being judged and compared to the tests that he was given. Now let's apply this to this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah reading, we talk about Abraham's first prophecy and his first mission. Go from your land, from your father's household, from the place that you know, El Arza Shereka, to the land I'll show you. It's kind of vague. We barely met him yet. So a little introduction to him in last week's Torah reading at the very end. Who is he? Noach, we're given his title, Ish Tzadik. Avram, we're given his mission. Who is he? Says the great Rabbeinu Bachai, very similar to what I just said about Noach. we know who he is through the mission, because the mission was the test. His test was, leave your environment, leave everything you know, leave your father, leave your family, and go to a land I'm not telling you what it is yet. Just, can you do that? Can you follow my word without knowing exactly where you're going, and at the same time leaving everything you know? It wasn't like today. You can go to another country and be in contact all the time. Even when I was a kid. When I studied in Israel, I got to call home once a week, maybe. It was too expensive. Nowadays, when my children go to Israel, that we get pictures every 40 minutes. Constant contact. Those days, thousands of years ago, if you went to another place, another country, you might as well have gone to another planet in another galaxy. There was never contact again. But that was his mission. But that's how we were introduced to him also. We were introduced to him through his test. Avram was tested, and he rose to the occasion. So now we know how great he is, and we can go right into his mission. And his mission is his test. Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, the great Satmar Rebbe, said back in the 1960s in America, in Williamsburg, that a Jew in the little shtetls, the little Jewish towns, little Jewish ghettos in Europe, didn't see improprieties in a lifetime what a Jew sees in America, in Williamsburg, in the 60s, every time he steps his foot out of his front door. Imagine what the Satmar Rebbe would say today. The tests, the improprieties, the things we shouldn't see, the things we shouldn't look at, the things we shouldn't get involved in. We don't even have to walk out of the house. It's a press of a button. It's in our pockets. It's on our desks. It's everywhere. If we can just rise to the occasion, imagine a turn of the head, a close of the eyes, Tzaddik Tamim Bidorosov, maybe? A tzaddik in his generation, a tzaddik in his time, a tzaddik in his test. He's risen to that level. I heard a story, so appropriate, that when President Trump was shot, the trajectory of the bullet would have penetrated his skull. And whether you like him or you don't, history would have changed drastically. What changed history? The very, very slight move of the head. That very slight move of the head made the difference between life and death for the president, and the difference between having a horrible outcome that could change our history drastically for our country, for the world. Tests. Small, sometimes insignificant, but it can make the difference in a person being called a tzaddik bidorosov in his time, in his generation. It can make the difference in the history of the world. Awesome.